Hello, everyone, and welcome to Expert Webcast. I'm Alex Kasdan, Managing Partner of Convergence, and I'm pleased to moderate today's panel on best practices in M&A due diligence. Got a great panel of speakers here today, whom I will introduce in a moment. We've got a series of questions from the audience already, and I would encourage everybody viewing or listening to this presentation to submit questions to the panel or any of the speakers, and we'll try to address as many as we can. Let me start by introducing Sean Monroe, who is a partner in the mergers and acquisitions and entertainment and media practice of Paul Hastings. He specialized in complex mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, private equity, and corporate finance transactions, including fund formation and investments, portfolio company acquisitions and divestitures, joint ventures and restructurings, venture capital, and early stage formation and investment transactions, as well as executive employment and compensation structures. Sean has particular expertise in advising entertainment and media clients in all aspects of transactions in these industries, including motion picture financings, television business acquisitions and investments, digital and new media venture formations, and other investment disposition and licensing matters involving these businesses. Ancillary to his core practice, Sean has also extensive experience with federal and state securities laws and regulations, state corporate laws, and general corporate matters and corporate governance, with related experience in tax, intellectual property, employee benefits, ERISA, environmental, and bankruptcy practice areas. Sean has been recognized as a Hollywood power lawyer by the Hollywood Reporter, has been featured in Variety's Legal Impact Report, and was named among the top minority attorneys in Los Angeles by the Los Angeles Business Journal. Sean holds his JD from Berkeley Law and his bachelor's from Georgetown University. Sean, great to have you on Expert Webcast.
Thank you, Alex.
Elaine Carey is a managing director at FTI Consulting, splitting her time between Los Angeles and the Bay Area. She has served as an advisor and problem solver to senior executives of Fortune 100 corporations and law firms for more than 30 years, overseeing clients' most complex and sensitive problems around the globe, involving integrity, political security, and reputational risks. Elaine also co-leads FTI Consulting's cannabis practice. Her expertise includes due diligence, fraud, business intelligence, FCPA, anti-money laundering, compliance and investigations, cannabis compliance, mining, Latin America, asset tracing, intellectual property, theft, and supply chain issues. Elaine has helped corporations identify and work through thorny reputational issues, including environmental, health and safety, labor practice issues, including slave labor and trafficking. Early on in her career, Elaine was an investigative journalist reporting from more than 30 countries on political, economic, business, and social developments, including establishing an office in Moscow for Cox newspapers in 1988 and chronicling the end of the Soviet Union. Elaine holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English Literature from Grinnell College, was a mid-career fellow at the Harvard University Russian Research Center. She's a certified fraud examiner and anti-money laundering specialist. Elaine, great to have you on Expert Webcast as always.
Thank you, Alex.
Dan Schoenberg is co-CEO of Global Mergers and Acquisitions Group and practice head of transactional liability, tax and litigation, contingent risk insurance at Alliant Insurance Services. He is one of the nation's foremost authorities in representations and warranties insurance, tax insurance, and litigation insurance, as well as ensuring other contingent risks in M&A and non-M&A related situations. Prior to joining Alliant, Dan was co-head of the Transaction Solutions Group at Aon, where he placed more than 30 billion of representations and warranties insurance, tax liability insurance, and litigation judgment insurance. Prior to Aon, Dan was a director at Deutsche Bank and served as tax counsel for the bank. I also was associated with Norton Rose Fulbright and Hunter Andrews Kurth prior to that. Dan holds a bachelor's degree in political science and government from Johns Hopkins University and his law degree from Benjamin Cardozo School of Law at Yeshiva University. Dan, great to have you back on Expert Webcast.
Thanks, Alex. Always happy to participate. Good seeing everybody.
Great. And then last but not least is Richard Andersen, who is an experienced Silicon Valley entrepreneur, has spent more than 25 years in finance, operations, and advisory roles, at market-leading companies, including Apple, eBay, and Ernst & Young. Richard is the founder and CEO of ShareVault, where he leads an energized team of cloud technology pioneers who are driving the leading edge of secure document sharing and collaboration for businesses worldwide. Richard has his bachelor's degree from Whitworth University and his MBA from the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. Richard, great to have you on Expert Webcast.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and looking forward to the discussion today.
Great. To jump right into the discussion, as we were just looking at the statistics, the last 2 years, while in the midst of the pandemic, have been record years for deal making. With 2021 just under 6 trillion in deals, 5.9 trillion. The pace so far as of February, at least of this year, is as strong, if not stronger. Yet the practice of doing deals has changed by necessity. I mean, in the midst of lockdowns, pandemic, travel restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. So let me go to Sean as the M&A lawyer in the panel. What has changed in how we do deals in the last 2 years?
Well, thank you, Alex. I think the first data point you hit on, which is the pace of transactions, and I think M&A lawyers have been supporting those deals from home, remotely. Although that is not necessarily a change that we've seen solely as a result of the pandemic, in that due diligence, even prior to 2020, had moved from a legal perspective to being largely virtual through the formation of virtual data rooms and the accessing of those materials by attorneys remotely. The days of on-site due diligence where lawyers get on a plane and sit in a client's file room to actually pull paper out of a file cabinet, I think are a thing of the past. But what has happened is, as you noted, is you've got teams highly focused on reviewing material, incredible volumes of material in a very compressed time frame to meet what the industry and what client demands have been over this last period.
Thank you, Sean. I agree with you. I think what has happened is that the pandemic really hasn't changed things. It accelerated the change. And it's a good segue to go to Richard as the CEO and founder of ShareVault. I mean, ShareVault's been around obviously before the pandemic, and one thing that the pandemic, the relevance of technology has become much greater in the last 2 years. I mean, when people reach out to you, they don't ask you to get on a phone call or a conference call. They say, do you want to set up a Zoom? A few years ago, hardly anybody had heard of Zoom, right? Yeah. What difference are you seeing in terms of due diligence cycles as technology continues to play a more and more important role in deal making?
Good question, Alex. I think the fact that there's good technology that underpins the diligence process raises expectations on both sides, that there can be a very, very high bandwidth conversation between the buy side and the sell side, and ready access to information, and also ability to add more information or dive deeper kind of as needed to get answers to key questions. I think that from a fidelity of the conversation standpoint, that benefits both sides, sell side and buy side. I also think that video, new media types are now being supported. You can have secure video, for example, inside of the data room, watermarked so that it can't be, it's hard to misappropriate it, things like that. I think it's with the more advanced data rooms, clearly with ShareVault, you can actually cater to multiple prospective buyers or investors, what have you, simultaneously, and organize things so that you can cater to the way each of those independent parties might want to review your information without having to duplicate the information, for each party and try to keep track of what becomes a real mess. You can kind of multiplex the individual files themselves for the various parties you're trying to communicate with. And I think the last thing is the ability to revoke things. Unwind sharing has improved quite a bit. So there's that capability, and also just the compliance and the audit trail, so you can really have an ironclad history of what happened in that very high bandwidth, document centric, multi-party conversation.
Thank you, Richard. And I'll come back to a couple of points you brought up, but let me go to Elaine. You're an expert on due diligence, operational diligence, background investigations, reputational diligence. What are some of the hot topics now? And we have a lot of things going on, certainly recently. I mean, again, the pandemic. We have war, Russia and Ukraine, sanctions. I mean, there's just so many moving pieces. What are sort of the primary issues you're focusing on right now?
There are a lot of issues that we often reported back to clients in terms of doing due diligence, but they're now taking them on with greater importance. So you have all the issues of ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, that before people thought, yeah, okay, that's kind of nice, but you're going to see the standards for those, particularly in investments, begin to take hold internationally, and some agreement being made internationally about what those standards are that you should come to. But then there are obviously the other issues, such as any kind of bribery, whether it's through the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or just bribery, plain old bribery, because I've seen deals in the US where it's come down to some local officials being bribed. And then there is the Me Too issue, which has been really big with in M&A recently, because nobody wants to be in the middle of a deal or have just done a deal and have something to show up in the Wall Street Journal. So those are all issues. The more and more, though, these social issues, you mentioned the war, but the issues of who you're doing business with, or what their reputation is, and actually what the management, the CEO, is thinking. Think about Disney and Bob Chapek right now, when he didn't speak up against the Florida laws that were anti-gay. He had a walkout. He had both customers as well as employees that really gave him a lot of pushback. He ended up apologizing. So there are issues like that we've seen more and more in recent years, these social issues that, so sometimes we come back and say, well, the CEO or the CFO is great, but he has some white supremacist sort of things posted on his social media. And people now, a few years ago, people would say, I don't care what's on his social media. Now, when I come back and tell them, they care. They care big time, and it will kill a deal. So there are all sorts of other issues that you might have considered kind of soft or squishy, or, oh, that's just his personal life. Not anymore.
And I think also, again, the pandemic accelerated that. I mean, the personal life and business life is one and the same now.
Yeah.
Everybody working remotely, working from home, or at least until very recently.
The good thing on that score is when we do our business intelligence interviews for deals, it's much easier to get people to talk because they're generally at home and they're like, oh, okay, I'll chat with you. They seem to pick up the phone more readily, which is good for us.
Right. Thank you, Elaine. Let me go to Dan. And Dan, you're an expert on transactional insurance, whether it's reps and warranties, tax. Again, reps and warranties insurance have become almost a necessity in deals at this point, particularly private equity deals, but I think we're seeing more and more transactional insurance and strategic deals as well. Can you talk about the market a little bit and how that has changed?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Look, the reps and warranties market and the other transactional liability products, mostly tax insurance and litigation insurance, everyone had their best year in 2021 for policies placed. We think something like 70% of private transactions between 50 million and $1 billion of enterprise value now use reps and warranties insurance or one of these other transactional risk products. And strategic deals, 40% of our policies, and again, it's the buyer that's going to be the insured on these policies. 40% of our policies last year were placed for strategic buyers who, have come in late in the game, but have realized that they're at a competitive disadvantage by not entertaining reps and warranties insurance, particularly where the sell side documents, are contemplating reps and warranties insurance. Reps and warranties insurance, this is all happening, with record numbers, despite premiums being up, generally speaking, about 40% in the second half of 2021. Claims are here, and claims are, being addressed. We have, numerous carriers have paid out 9 figures in reps and warranties claims, but in a lot of ways it's been good for the business. I think that the premiums, I don't know if we can go much higher, and in fact in 2022 we're seeing a little bit of breathing room on premium rates compared to where the skyrocketing in fourth quarter, but premium rates are where they are, but the clients now see that these things pay out, and that it's fairly easy to prove to a carrier that a breach has occurred. It might take some discussions with them on what the quantum of loss is that's appropriate to be paid, and that it certainly should be no harder to collect from a reps and warranties carrier than from a third-party seller under an indemnity obligation. So again, we're all counting on 2022 to be another big year for the products. In fact, 2 of our products, tax and litigation insurance, are growing faster by percentage than reps and warranties insurance, where we really saw the big boom in 17, 18. But, again, barring some, 10-figure claim that, blows the market, like a limit loss on a $10 billion transaction policy, I think, again, we're, we expect some more carriers coming into the space shortly. And, things look pretty good from our end.
Thank you, Dan. Why such a huge jump on such a huge increase on the premiums? Is just a supply demand issue?
No, it's claims, material contracts and material customers, choice of law issues, financial statement reps, inventory. We have claims. Every one of our carriers are dealing with, dozens, if not, 100 plus more claims. I think one of our carriers, Euclid, actually published that, they paid out, 200 claims last year, and, see a lot more. I mean, a lot of these claims are within the retention, so they're not even payouts. So the number of actual claims filed is exponentially more than the number of claims paid out. But claims are here. All of our carriers have had to step up on claims, staff, hiring, insurance recovery partners or associates from the law firms. And, the carriers expect a certain return, but frankly, loss ratios from 40 to say 60% are still very attractive in the financial services, industry, in insurance industry. If you've ever seen horrific loss ratios that some of these carriers take on more traditional products like D&O or E&O, where they may actually be writing these products at a loss because they're trying to, grab other more profitable lines of P&C from these same clients. I think we're at right now where the carriers still want to play and clients still want to buy at these prices. But no, it's claims. That's what, why the spike in premiums.
Thank you, Dan. Let me turn to Sean. You're as the M&A lawyer on the panel. I've seen sort of focusing on the reps and warranties insurance for a minute. I've seen M&A lawyers as the biggest proponents of reps and warranties insurance. What has been the effect of having the insurance despite the claims or perhaps with the claims being filed that Dan was talking about on both the deal cycle as well as the due diligence involved?
Well, I think on the deal cycle, it's, M&A lawyers, like it because it's a way of dealing with the risk that's identified in due diligence without the two parties butting heads over negotiations over indemnification. And one of the, maybe one of the changes I've seen, certainly over the span of my career, is an increased focus on risk from both the buy and the sell side. There's, through the diligence process, risk is assessed, it's identified, and then the question is, what do you do with it in order for a deal to go forward and the trade to happen? So rep and warranty insurance is a very useful off-ramp in that you've got highly sophisticated, obviously, insurance companies with metrics and data and assessments as to where their exposure lies, and you're able to price the risk and pay for it and get a transaction accomplished. What it's done on the diligence front as well is increase the focus on doing diligence well, because M&A, both buyers and sellers recognize that the underwriters of rep and warranty insurance will do their own diligence. And M&A lawyers and operators are very familiar with the bring down diligence calls, as are other participants in the process. And those bring down calls are exacting, and there's a real analysis as to the quality of diligence that was conducted, the answers that were received, and essentially, the buyer's judgment as to whether the risk was material or not, to make the basis of the underwriting decision. So I think it's put a lot of focus for the lawyers in particular to get those to think forward about what issues are going to be raised and how are they solved. Have we closed every issue down? Because you don't want to be in the underwriting call not having the right answer, only to find out that the underwriter may request an exclusion from a policy, and now you're right back where you didn't want to be, having a risk which the parties need to allocate among themselves.
Thank you, Sean. Sticking to the subject of due diligence, let me go back to Richard, and I'm looking at a couple of questions that came in. Technology is great, virtual is great, but what about kicking the tires operationally or in terms of deal integration? Is there anything that we can do from a technology perspective to make that aspect easier, short of jumping on a plane and going somewhere?
Well, I mean, I think having conversations that are just highly contextually relevant with anyone who's interested, from, let's say it's the sell side talking to the buy side, inviting people to get clarification and address issues, as Sean was saying, get issues out of the way, way up front, so they don't become, impediments to getting a deal done, and just having using technology as a reference point. So, the documents and so forth, to have Zoom calls and other things to get questions answered and build, I think, use it to build some rapport. I mean, I think that's kind of at the heart of how we all use technology these days, is to connect with one another, and doing that around documents. The nice thing about some of the tools, kicking the tires, is being able to drill down on things. You can ask questions inside of the platforms, the data rooms these days, and get detailed answers. And in the case of ShareVault, you can actually get an answer that's moderated through various parties. It could be the answer may require outside counsel to weigh in, and maybe some inside, executives or finance to weigh in to get a proper answer back to the counterparty that's asking that question. That allows a much greater degree of visibility into the underlying asset or the business. And then getting on a plane and meeting. I think a lot of deals maybe get to a stage where the executive team might come in toward the tail end of the deal, and to have a face-to-face conversation. Well, that can be preceded by lots of high quality information sharing both sides, and then that last step, I think, can allow the seller to really look the buyer in the eye and really get a sense of how are we going to fit into your growth strategy? Is this deal going to have executive attention? So that it actually is going to prosper within the confines of the buying company. So I think there's it's an evolving thing, the conversation, and there's room for technology, and there's also times when face-to-face matters a lot too.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's also evolving behavior on the part of the deal makers and the principals. People are just much more comfortable doing things remotely than they would have been, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. Let me go back to Elaine on the investigative due diligence and the things. It's a very, some will say, overheated deal market, M&A market, certainly very robust. Do things start falling through cracks when the markets get this hot?
People get in a hurry to do a deal because they think somebody else is going to grab it up so they can get fixed on the deal. We often find that the lawyers like Sean will bring us in at the last minute because nobody's thought to check out the other side. And then, I will get a call and say, but we need the answers in 5 days. And I was like, but and then I find it's usually because they were so wedded to the deal, they just didn't possibly think that something could be wrong with the other side. But I have also seen deals where we've come back and said, there is a suggestion, that there is some, one case was a price fixing going on. And this was like at a Friday afternoon that we told them that. And they said, can you figure this out by Monday morning? We did. But, that's what happens when you get into those kind of deals. Or, and many people say, we don't want people like you, Elaine, doing any kind of people due diligence, reputational due diligence, because you could screw up my deal. And my rejoinder to them is, it's a lot less expensive for me to do it up front than for you to pay for the mess afterward. And I've seen hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes disappear literally overnight after the deal is done because it didn't check out what was going on.
Thank you, Elaine. Well, back to Sean, I think due diligence is a bit of a balancing act, right? You can do it indefinitely, but then the deal will fall apart. So as the market is really hot, are people sort of compressing due diligence timeframe?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, Elaine hit on one of the notes that I had written down, competition. I mean, a feature of this heated deal market is, for sellers, they've got other options. For buyers, they've got other, targets. And so professionals are often dealing with a very short time frame. You're often asked, often deals are negotiated while diligence is continuing. The concept of confirmatory due diligence, which you'll often see in letters of intent, which is intended to signal to the parties that, we're almost done. Well, for those lawyers who get brought in to do the quote confirmatory diligence, that's often the start of our look at a target. So then you're getting pressure from the clients and the other sides under short exclusivity windows to finish things. So I think what's important is to communicate with the client, to focus typically now on the red flags. Clients are often looking, for us to identify what should they be worried about along Elaine's, fault. I don't need summaries of every contract. I don't need you to tell me stuff that you as professionals are not that worried about. It may go into a due diligence report. It may come up on diligence calls, but they really want to know, and often in a phased manner, what are the most important things? Get those issues out as soon as possible to the client team, up the ladder as much as possible. If there are business issues, they'll go to the bankers, to the accountants, to others advisors. And so, Alex, absolutely, the compression of time in competition increases, the speed at which you need to get answers, but it's all got to be right. It's all got to be, and at some point you really need to identify an issue and have a decision made and document that. I think, just if I could go on, one of the things that Richard was mentioning about his product at ShareVault is having a platform where questions can be shared across participants in a process and even across sort of segments of a deal is incredibly important, because tracking questions and answers that may come in from a banker, that may come in from accountants, that may be a legal question, it's really key to integrate all that in a cohesive way.
Thank you, Sean.
I've actually seen times where a deal gets turned down because of something we come up with. And yet, like a month later or 2 months later, somebody else comes along to do the same deal. And they said, oh, they should told us to go talk to you. And when we tell them, they're like, oh, no, he couldn't have done that. Yes, he did do that. No, he couldn't have done it. There are some subjects who are just outright fraudsters that, we went through 3 or 4 people were still intent on buying them. And I kept saying, usually I call in the lawyers. I said, this guy is a fraudster, believe me. But they're so in love with the deal that.
Typically, as people fall in love with the deal, as you said, Elaine and Sean, they don't want to hear it, but sometimes the best deal is the one you walk away from.
Sure.
That's right.
Hey, I was going to comment as well. I think we're on the topic of the shortened timeframes for diligence and getting deals done. And I think that puts a greater onus on the disclosing side, the sell side, let's say, to be really well organized and anticipate a tight time frame. Have the information that's likely to be needed close at hand. And I think, and then one step before that is build within the culture of the company a culture of accountability and information integrity, so that whatever's used, the metrics and the underlying documents that are used to run the business are available at the point in time when another interested party wants to understand how's that business run.
No, great point, Richard. Well, that's a good segue to go to Dan. So we've got a overheated deal market, got people falling in love with deals. They want to close those deals. They start due diligence Friday, want to get it done by Monday. Then they call you on Monday, they want to add the insurance component to the deal. How does it all sort of work together, and how much time do you need to underwrite deals, and how do you do your own diligence?
Yeah, I mean, look, with reps and warranties insurance, not only are we broking more deals, but the time pressure on the deals that we're broking certainly has gotten condensed, over the last 2 years. Clients now want us to not only give them a desk quote right over the phone, before we've seen almost any information, but they also want to know from the brokers what the exclusions are going to look like, again, before we've seen any documents, or sometimes we haven't even talked to the buyer yet, because it's the seller and their counsel that kind of brought us in to go out and get the quotes. We get quotes based on very little, but that hasn't changed. Draft SPA, even an auction draft, some audited financials, some management presentation or offering memo or banker teaser describing the business. We'll get quotes within 3 days and prepare a package of quotes. If where time is of the essence, I can cherry pick 2 or 3 carriers that, I think will be a great fit for this deal, or we've done, similar deals before, call in a favor and get that done, in 24 hours. But, 3 days to get a package of quotes. But on the due diligence side, look, reps and warranties insurance, the key documents on any reps exercise are the buy side due diligence reports, legal, financial, tax, and any, industry specific due diligence. And, some people still think, particularly, on the buy side, that, hey, does the reps and warranties insurance exercise kind of, alleviate the need to do fulsome due diligence? And, the answer is, absolutely not. Again, especially if time is of the essence, people have fallen in love with a deal, there's pressure to sign. Having fulsome, detailed due diligence reports is going to make the job much, much easier on the reps and warranty side. Very often, if the due diligence isn't up to par, the carrier, even if they're still interested in the deal, is going to send on a list of questions, and we may have to have calls before they'll agree to move forward with their underwriting. Again, just things that take up time. The better due diligence on the buyer side that we can present to the carrier up front, the faster this is going to look like. We've gotten deals bound over a weekend, but that is extremely painful and something I wouldn't recommend. Typically speaking, a good timeline for reps and warranties insurance is 3 days to get the quotes, another 7 days to put the policy in place at signing, typically. If it's a larger tower where I'm building a layered program of insurance, typically that applies to deals over about $300 million of enterprise value, where I'm going to have to bring in a second, third, or fourth carrier to fill the order. That could add a few days to the process, but very little with reps and warranties insurance. If there's good due diligence and counsel's responding quickly, it shouldn't take more than 2 weeks from start to finish. But yeah, condensed. I mean, and look, there's a tremendous, everyone knows it's a tremendous war for, good brokers and good underwriters out there, where we desperately all need to have to staff up. Usually the brokers staff up first and then the underwriters. It kind of usually works that way, but both sides need to staff up. I spend a good chunk of my time just looking for talent and recruiting, but right now, yeah, I think, and again, for clients that have done a policy already with a carrier and we're going back to that carrier and we have a form that's been negotiated and the carrier's familiar and comfortable with that buyer's due diligence process, we could maybe condense the whole process down to a week. But 10 to 14 days from start to finish is about standard.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Let me switch gears a little bit and go back to Richard on the due diligence end of things. I'm finding very significant differences in representing sort of entrepreneurs, middle market companies for whom an M&A transaction is not an everyday occurrence, maybe once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Sort of transaction, and due diligence is often a misunderstood topic. Whether it's self-diligence or diligence with prospective acquirers. What are some of the main stages of the diligence process that they should be aware of in getting ready for the deal?
Oh, sure. Well, I think, as the company evolves, I think it's starting early to think about an exit. That could be, or a financing along the way, or an exit, but just being ready for diligence as a practice, I think is one thing. Another thing is to engage a community of advisors, intermediaries that can help, or your attorney, obviously, if you have a relationship with a banker, or want to start, setting those things up. I think that's important to getting set up for diligence, and then just being out there in the market, talking to corporate development leaders in your space to make sure that, finding out what they're interested in, what they're seeing as red flags on deals, or if there are similar companies out there that have transacted, knowing how that went and so forth. And so I think there's that kind of the environment around your potential deal that you can be thinking about and trying to set it up so you can have some high quality conversations that could lead to a term sheet and the follow-on process. And I think then and just being a strong CFO who's actually raised capital or exited is instrumental as well, because they typically will help you get organized and start pulling the documents together, everything very early as a matter of standard practice. And I think also, just compliance, being well aware of what your compliance requirements are. We talked about ESG dimensions of this, and also cyber compliance, or making sure that your security department has things in order, staying on top of that, and if there are any industry standards that your company complies with, making sure that's organized, because the whole thing has to converge, to a point where things can happen really quickly with a very high degree of fidelity. Otherwise, things can go, deal can unwind, or there can be follow-on litigation. So I think it's just, kind of getting, moving toward that ultimate, event horizon of when a potential transaction can happen. It's a march, slow. It's a steady march.
I agree 100%. Also, a potential transaction might not be of your choosing as a seller. You may get an unsolicited offer. I think one of the great things about technology, again, in the data rooms, is the ability to stay organized. Just, if somebody asks you a question, here's a stack of documents. You don't need to go start looking through manila folders and trying to find documents.
That's right.
A bit of my time doing as a lawyer back in the day, but everything is electronically organized.
We make it easy too. Just as a fine point on that is, you don't have to scan documents in and do a bunch of heavy lifting anymore. The systems are robust enough to do most of that lifting for you, and and setting the security up and all that. It's pretty straightforward if you use a high quality data room for that. If it's kind of a roll your own thing, then that can be a little bit more tedious. But if you use a high quality data room, it's generally a pretty refined process.
Make Sean's work really easy for him.
Try to. We've learned over time, some specific things that M&A attorneys really care about, and we try to cater to those needs because they're an important constituent.
Thank you, Richard. Sean, let me switch gears again, and we started talking about the war in Eastern Europe, Russia-Ukraine war, and sort of the attendant sanctions and trade restrictions and all the things. And I'm not going to talk here about the sort of the human element or the humanitarian tragedy that's going on, but just focusing on the finance and the deal making aspects. What's going on with the sanctions, and how does, in the context of M&A, how do we approach that?
Well, Alex, and it certainly is certainly is a tragedy. And I think, the hallmark of due diligence is really to focus on risk. And so the first step in thinking about the sanction regimes, which have been promulgated from the U.S. and from around the world, is, are you dealing with a company that has touch points in those particular areas? If so, then your antenna needs to go up, and you've got to do some digging. In the U.S., the sanctions regime is strict liability in terms of violating restrictions on transacting business with sanctioned individuals, countries or companies. So that certainly puts a lot of pressure from a legal side on understanding whether, from a strict liability standpoint, there's any exposure there. There's no standard in terms of what diligence is reasonable in the circumstances. But just like any diligence, what you're looking for are red flags. You're looking for questions which don't seem to be answered quite in the right way. You're looking for a document or a thread which suddenly sort of goes cold, and you're not able to look behind an ownership document, or you don't get an answer as to who actually is the shareholder in a particular LLC. And then, as Elaine mentioned, earlier, one of the impacts of the sanctions against the Russian Federation is what happens next, in particular with China. And depending on the way that China's political and international policies proceed, to the extent that there are sanctions imposed on that country or nationals of that country, sellers and buyers should perhaps look over the horizon and think about any exposure in their transactions from sort of broadened sanctions regimes.
Thank you,
I would chime in there, Alex, and say that there'll be the obvious ones that you might have some connection to Russia, but over recent years, we've done a lot of investigations where investment money, PE firms, or some sort of hedge funds, a lot of them we've identified have some of those Russians in them. So when I saw the sanctions list come out, I was like, oh yeah, I know this guy and this guy and this guy. Yeah, we run into them in lots of places, Silicon Valley, you name it, they're in there. So, but you have to dig deeper than just, you've got an entity up here and then another entity. And when you get to 3 or 4, you might begin to pick up the trail that this is actually an oligarch has his hand in there. And in some cases, you've got to know who the front person or the straw man is for the oligarch. And that does take some serious digging. But right now, companies are doing it. We've been on an emergency basis helping companies identify, they've sent us names and say, are these people on the list? Because the list is, 1, long, and 2, the actual name might be not on there, but there might be an alias for that guy, or there might be he might have other entities that they don't recognize, but it still ties back to the same person. So it's made things very complicated and obviously very serious.
But it's also, the list itself, I think, is a bit of a moving target. I was reading this morning, I just added 400 entities and individuals to the sanctions list. So it might not have been a problem yesterday, but it's going to be a problem, today. Yeah,
and the other part of that is you have, financial institutions, et cetera, are, they're accustomed to dealing with it, and they've loaded into their algorithms that spits it out. They run the OFAC list every morning or whatever it is. But for sort of ordinary corporations, or probably, various other people, that's not part of their daily life, or it wasn't until recently. But so it does add a new wrinkle that people should be aware of. And, we see it all the time. Sometimes we find those connections really easily, and sometimes you really have to dig for it. But I've turned a couple of deals off when it took me 10 minutes to find a link to Russia and Putin. I just called the potential client back and said, I don't think you want to do this.
Right. Thank you, Elaine and Sean. Let me go to Dan. Is that one of the areas of greater scrutiny now for the insurance underwriting, transactional insurance underwriting?
For U.S. targets, not so much for the vast majority of deals that we do at the moment. Obviously, if it's a target that has, operations in Eastern Europe or otherwise, plainly could be impacted by, sanctions or otherwise, the carriers really will expect the due diligence done by buyer to address that. And hopefully it will, and they won't have to go in and ask their own questions, which could be problematic. But no, so far, I mean, look, in Europe with warranty indemnity insurance, I mean, certainly the carriers are watching this stuff very closely. But for now, no, I haven't seen any blanket exclusions proposed or, any, to my knowledge, any deals die that we were involved in because of, the situation in Ukraine. But time will tell. I think, sort of, it reminds me a little bit of when COVID first started and the insurance companies were wrangling over, how to address potential implications of COVID in the policy. Should there be an exclusion just in their specimen policy? How far should that exclusion go? What would be required in the due diligence for targets, that, might be more heavily impacted by COVID than others? This, time will tell. But for now, I'd say, the situation's had little direct impact on the reps and warranties product as a whole.
Thank you, Doug. Let me turn back to Sean as the M&A lawyer on the panel. Are there any legal developments for the case law, regulatory that we need to be aware of that affect M&A deals and M&A diligence?
Thank you. Good question. And there was a recent decision from the Delaware Chancery Court, Arwood v. AW Site Services LLC, which it was a Chancery Court case and may be subject to appeal and decision ultimately by the Delaware Supreme Court, but made clear that Delaware is a pro-sandbagging state for allocation of liability for breach of reps and warranties. And what that means is, in this case, the buyer did extensive due diligence on the target, a independent entrepreneur and doing his first deal with a private equity fund, did extensive due diligence and uncovered various misstatements, in particular in the financial statement. The buyer then sued for damages following the transaction closing, and was able to recover based solely on a breach of the reps and warranties that were made. The seller alleged, well, buyer knew about the misstatements in the reps and warranties. They did extensive diligence. Heck, they even built the financial statements for this business. The decision by the Chancery Court judge was that Delaware is a pro-contractarian state. And that its laws will protect the contracts which are negotiated between parties. What this means, I think, and it ties into some of the things that Richard and others, what we've been talking about, is on the sell side, it's really important to understand your diligence, to understand what information are you turning over to the buyers, what do they know about your business, what are the reps and warranties and disclosures that you are then making in a contract, because at least in Delaware, you'll be held to the letter of the contract and the related disclosures, and you will not be able to argue, well, the buyer knew or should have known, or they were in my data room for X number of weeks, and I'm not responsible. If it's in the four corners of the document that you've made a representation, regardless of the diligence that was done by the buyer, you're responsible. So I think that's an important watermark. Now, different state laws are different in terms of how they treat the sandbagging issue. So you do have to look at the governing law of your particular state, but at least in Delaware, the contract's going to rule, notwithstanding diligence the buyer may have done.
Good. Thank you, Sean. Let me go back to Dan on the insurance, on the transactional insurance. What are some of the areas of highest scrutiny and what risks are typically excluded from your perspective?
Well, again, I won't get into industry by industry exclusions because obviously, depending on what industry we're in, what kind of target we're looking at, where its operations are, we could be talking about, specific stuff. But generally speaking, the areas most ripe for exclusions that we've seen so far are, breaches of the financial statement representations, taxes. As you probably know, reps and warranties insurance typically provides a full pre-closing tax indemnity to the buyer. However, the tax due diligence report is, going to be scrutinized heavily, as that's an area where the carriers have seen claims. the IRS or states coming out of the woodwork and asserting liability for a pre-closing period. And they're going to, seek to have talks with us about, any issues that were yellow or red flagged by the accountants in the tax due diligence report, largely because, not only is it an area where exclusions can pop up, but there's also a separate tax insurance product which we sell billions and billions of dollars of a year, which is really a product that covers a specific tax risk from $1 that's been identified and really can be used to plug holes in the reps and warranties policy. So the carriers know that there's another product that will cover a specific tax issue where maybe buyers guys aren't that comfortable. Areas like I mentioned earlier, areas where we see a lot of claims these days, they're reps around material contracts, material customers are the target, choice of law issues, healthcare, which has fallen, healthcare targets, which are really fallen in my career, both in and out of favor with the reps and warranties market. We're going to see a list of exclusions around, Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement risk, and other areas that can be, spooky for the corporate lawyers at the underwriters that are reviewing, those data rooms. Obviously, the carrier is also very well aware that environmental, standalone environmental coverage is there, and for targets that are could have environmental liability, there could be exclusions there, and the carriers, of course, will their basis for that will be, if you're so worried about it, we've got another product like pollution legal liability or something like that can cover you for that. But again, it's usually speaking, putting aside industry-specific stuff, it's the financial the financial information statement reps and pre-closing tax matters, as a general rule, are going to be pretty well scrutinized these days by the carriers. But look, it's up to the broker, to make these exclusions go away, and if we can't, to hopefully, offer our clients, a solution with perhaps another insurance product.
Thank you, Dan. Let me go back to Richard. It mentioned cybersecurity, and cyber risks are on the rise. They have been on the rise for a while, but now again, as a result of the what's going on in Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, quite a bit of has been written on increasing cyber risks, especially for certain industries. Any tips on how to safeguard information in the data rooms as well as digital information outside of data rooms?
Yeah, there's a lot going on there, and it's a dangerous world that we live in these days. You have to, and I think I'm not a security professional, full stop, but I would say that every company should have a set of security, practices or policies that they adhere to. Everything from the way that the laptops are secure, the way people connect to the internet, all the scanning and security software that runs on their various devices, and then that even becomes more important or more prominent, I guess, if your business is one where you use computers to provide some of your service. There's a lot needed there. A couple of things we're seeing recently, three things, I guess. One would be more and more customers are asking how to protect the information that's not in the data room, digital information that's not in the data room. And so we've heard that for the last couple of years, and they're concerned about ransomware eliminating files and things like that, and other threats. So we've added the ability to control not just the static documents, they're typically the completed documents that are part of diligence, contracts and financials and things like that, that are kind of frozen in time, tax returns and so forth. But the work in process, their source code, their design documents. If they're manufacturing something overseas, they want to control the actual design software that goes into the computer chip or into the computer-aided manufacturing equipment. So that we've been asked to provide that kind of encryption is what it ends up being around those native files, native documents that are constantly changing. That's one thing. The other one, we're seeing more and more companies want to move processes which we've gotten pretty comfortable with using email, and Sean can probably attest to this, is, we email lots of red line contracts around, and, and sometimes it's just back and forth between a couple of folks, and that's fairly straightforward. But if there are a lot of people involved in a complex document that's getting redlined and revolved, that definitely helps from a security standpoint to move that to the cloud and have a more controlled process there around redlining. So that's something we've been asked to do, and we're providing that service now. And I mentioned earlier, secure tamper-proof video, because a lot of, some companies, particularly in the medical devices area for one, have really complex, technologies that are easily explained in a video. Well, it's fine to do that, but you don't want that to end up in the wrong hands. So being able to lock that stuff down. So that all kind of is in that area of, someone looking over your shoulder, and, a cyber risk here or there, and how do we, use technology to give ourselves the best chance of having, an integrity in our digital infrastructure and in our business practices.
Great. Thank you, Richard. We're unfortunately almost at the top of the hour, which went by quickly, but I wanted to give each of the speakers an opportunity for any closing remarks, or perhaps touching on an issue that we should have addressed here but didn't get a chance to. I'll start with Elaine on the investigative and due diligence end of things.
Yeah, I would just say that don't assume that everything that the other side is telling you is the God's honest truth. There are a lot of omissions that go along, and so you need to know those things in order to make a wise and profitable decision. Not knowing is not a good answer. And I'll just follow up on what Richard said. Cybersecurity, and my cyber colleagues regularly look at M&A deals to make sure that they have the potential target has at least the basics of policies and procedures. Do they do audits? Have they had breaches and they haven't told you about those? Or worse yet, they don't know about them. So there are some of those basics that will help keep you out of trouble. But the more you know, even though it seems painful and you're in a hurry, the better off you are in the end.
Trust but verify.
Absolutely.
Right. Let me go to Dan on the insurance end of things.
Yeah, guys, look, I mean, the title of this webinar is Best Practices in M&A Due Diligence. I mean, when it comes to reps and warranties, insurance, other transactional liability insurance, best practices is, fulsome M&A due diligence. Reps and warranties insurance doesn't work without advisors like the people on this phone doing their job and doing it well. Especially if we want to keep claims in check and keep premiums manageable for the for our clients. So as a broker, again, it's my job to work with the due diligence team to the extent that is helpful and that we can. Always happy to review documents in-house before sending it over to the insurance companies to kind of give initial impressions on what a reaction might be and what questions can come up. And again, we're here to facilitate, but want to thank not only you, Alex, but the other panelists who frankly help make the market for guys like me. So always happy to be on these panels.
Thank you, Dan. Let me turn to Richard on the due diligence and technology front.
Sure. I think I'd say a couple things. One of them is just kind of a tip to those who have a data room and or are considering using one, is to think about using it way in advance of an M&A transaction, just to carefully share your IP. That might be with advisory boards or your own board of directors or whatever. But just be careful, because that information custodianship can really matter in the long run, and and how you've incorporated even open source technologies and things like that into your stack. Just be careful on how you share those things. That's just, data rooms are great for that, and it doesn't have to be in the heat of a deal per se. But separate from that, I'd say try to envision the outcome as being a great transaction for both sides, not a good transaction. And I think that has to do with having the intentions and the needs of the counterparty well in mind. So, if it's the seller, just realize that the buyer is using a microscope, and whatever you can do to make their job easy, they've got accountants, lawyers, consultants, either operationally or technology folks, auditors that are, and regulatory specialists in some industries are going to be involved in that. Make it easy and provide, make it straightforward for them to complete a very thorough due diligence. And I think from the buy side, be very upfront about what you need and what you want, to be complete so that the buyer can meet your needs in a timely manner, so that at the end that can be a great deal for both sides from the diligence standpoint.
Thank you, Richard. And let me go back to Sean as the M&A lawyer on the panel.
Thank you. To echo one thing that Richard said is, and others, to be transparent in the diligence process. Frankly, to enjoy the diligence process. It's a great way for both the seller to understand their business, the buyer to understand theirs, and as I've mentioned, to allocate risk and appropriately or as desired within the contract itself. And then the last thing looking forward is to start to utilize technological tools such as AI. And our firm is using the Kira software system and other tools to bring some greater efficiencies to what we've talked about is an expanding scope of diligence and risk assessment. And so there are ways, for parties to find some efficiencies, whether it's cost or time, through technological tools, and we and others will be, utilizing them more and more going forward.
Nice.
Thank you, Sean. And I just took a couple of notes as everybody was speaking. Due diligence can really facilitate a great transaction. It's a thorough and efficient process. It doesn't have to be a scary process from the seller's perspective. And it's really a process to facilitate transaction and get the data across, negotiate the best deal and allocate risks. And I would encourage everybody, whether on the sell side or buy side, to bring in the right professionals, such as people that we have on this panel, because they can really help you ask the right questions, help you answer the questions, and sort of put things in perspective. I'd like to thank everybody here today. Sean, Richard, Elaine, and Dan, thank you for putting together a great presentation. And we are adjourned.
Thank you all
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.